We're live. Hi Rob, welcome to Venture with Grace.
Hey Grace, how are you doing this morning?
It's good. I have my tea ready. I feel like it's coughing season these days. So like whenever you go to anything, it's like five people coughing at you. So but
Yeah,
yeah,
I'm coffee, but
that's
I understand completely.
yours.
Yep.
To start off the show, I would love for the audience to get to know you a little bit more. So you have started your career as a senior audio software engineer, and you have worked on like various different companies that you had three axes before. You enter, well, not enter, but you went back to working at like big companies. And maybe we could start with like, what were some core lessons that you've learned early on in your career before that kind of like shape you into who you are today?
Yeah, I think that my journey is not all that different from what I'm learning from other people, although I feel like people have all these little variations of it. And that like I started off in big tech and then I did startups and then I went back to big tech for a bit. I'll probably end up going back to startups again sometime. It's the I feel like when you're in startups, you might start like missing certain elements of big tech. And when you're in big tech, you just kind of miss elements of startups. But rewinding all the way back, my dad taught software engineering at Carnegie Mellon, and uh, I always did music and computers at the same time from the time I was like a little kid. The piano behind me is real. People ask all the time. So yeah, that's a real piano.
Love that.
um, and so I played piano to kind of pay my way through school. And, I taught every like, kid like how to play Twinkle Twinkle and played every like bar mitzvah, museum opening, anything that would like pay the bills to kind of work through. And I just kept going. So I studied music and computer science, and then I got a master's in music technology. And I continued to kind of work towards further where I really studied AI and applied to music. And so I've been doing AI for over 20 years, and it was like the least popular thing you could go into at the time. And so when I started off, I worked on Media Composer and Pro Tools, which were really popular like audio and video editing platforms, really trying to get into like how do we start using these AI techniques in music. And eventually I got to the point where I was really, really lucky. I got to work on this amazing music service called Ardio, where I got to start what was we call it the data science team. I think these days you would just call it an AI team, because we did things like automatic playlisting, search, and we tried to do all sorts of things where we would do audio analysis on the files using digital signal processing, and we would try to make these recommendations like, you know, uh, based off of whatever you're listening to. And it was really, really fun. I think people still talk a lot about those products. And so like I got to start off working on like really fun music applications, which was kind of my goal in the first part of my career. And so that was honestly like terribly fun. I think people underestimate how important it is to work on like a product that you really like.
Mhm.
And so at the very beginning, I get to say that I had wonderful coworkers. They were still my friends to this day. And so I really feel like that first part of the career is super important. And it was super hard. Like I always felt like everybody else was better than me. I always felt that it was so hard to learn everything. I would constantly like take like these textbooks and read them at night to sort of try to get better and try to get mentors in the field. That was definitely one of my favorite parts, because I felt like I worked really, really hard to sort of get where I was going. And I just learned a ton along the way. And so that first part, I'll always kind of have very happy memories of, getting to work on products that I really, really loved, and getting to work with engineers that I thought were just spectacular. Like the quality of the engineers at Avid and Cisco and Ardio were just really, really top notch. And so it really set me up for the rest of my career after.
For sure. I wonder, so when you were like reading these textbooks, like what were you reading? Was it just like, how to improve my C++ skills, or was there some particular stuff that you feel like are
you know,
actually
I
cool?
I think I read like the C++ FAQ like beginning to end, like so many times.
That's
And I
pretty.
read, like there's so many of those books where I look back, I read all the design patterns books, and I was like, it was really funny because as a professional engineer, especially when you're first starting, like they don't really let you work on some of the higher concepts. You sort of start off with, I remember at Avid, for example, we were doing some really low level programming, and they're like, yeah, you're not allowed to use any advanced libraries. Everything has to be kept to simple operations. In fact, no using divisions. Everything has to be a multiplication. And, because we were trying to build this like really ultra performant code. And, so everything was like, okay, here's like the book version, but then my actual work was a lot more just sort of, Avid in particular, I thought was really excellent. Like they always had these engineering reviews where you'd have to like write up what you were going to be doing. And, so in the early days, it was just a lot of like, classic C++ textbooks, but also then a lot of audio textbooks. Even things like, like Stanford has a lab called Karma, and they had published all this like how to do DSP. And so I remember reading that cover to cover like multiple times and still feeling like I didn't quite have it. I would say my biggest regret at that early stage was that I was much more of like a studier than like just like getting really good mentors, because I was afraid to ask. Right.
I guess like what do you consider as like a good mentor? I think the problem of having a mentor is like I think it's I guess if you were working at a startup it's easier as there's like only a few people working on the team. Or do you mean by like you have to manually find someone outside of work to kind of like coach you on certain things?
Inside of work is fantastic. And honestly, probably that's where a lot of people should start. But sometimes it helps to have somebody who's like not on your immediate team. And so if you're in a startup, that can be a little tricky because you might not have that many people. And I think a lot of times when we're thinking about sort of early mentors, we might like try to go on like, I don't know. I remember spending like a lot of time like IRC, with like people who are a little bit faceless in a sense, like they didn't necessarily have any stake in the game. And so it's really, really valuable to be able to like go take somebody out for a coffee or go on a long walk, especially if you're having like a really hard time. And so I think I wish that I had looked for mentors outside of my like immediate team and outside of just kind of online, just like other people in the community. And I live in San Francisco now, and in San Francisco, of course, you can get access to just incredible engineers everywhere, and they would be super happy to get a coffee or something. But at the very, very beginning, I think it was just people that I was mostly working directly with. I didn't attend a lot of, I was still playing music at night at the beginning. I was like, for the first part of my career, I would work all day and then I would go and like play piano. So I played, piano for like local radio stations and like all this other stuff. I was still like trying to do both. And eventually that honestly burnt me out really hard. So that was like the tipping point where I decided, okay, you have to like pick what your career is after just, trying to burn the candle at both ends. I think around like 27, I finally said, okay, you've done this other thing. It's time to like hone in on one.
For sure. I want to maybe like double click on a few things. Like I think one of the big thing in your career is like you join RDO, and then later on you have you were the CTO of Automatic Labs, which sold to SiriusXM radio. So like I think as a podcaster, I feel like obviously everybody knows SiriusXM, but I guess maybe we could talk about like when you're working on, I feel like all of these have something to do with music or like to do with the artistic side, but it was not like purely just like a SaaS platform for XYZ, like a CRM or something, right? So maybe we could talk about like how do you kind of like what was your role there? So like you started as a like I guess like for RDO, so like you the when the at the end of the career there is you were the senior engineering manager, and then maybe we could talk about like the becoming the CTO of a company that sold to a different company. You know, what were some lessons that you've learned as a CTO?
Gosh, I mean, a ton is the short version. You know, at RDO, when I started the sort of the data science team, I was the only person.
Mhm.
And when we were like first releasing, you know, it was just me. Like, you know, I worked on a number of projects, but it was pretty like, you know, heads down, get out this stations release. That was kind of the goal. But then because I was successful, I was able to start hiring more people, and we were able to build a bigger team, and we were able to do more stuff. And so like everything was always very much so kind of building on top of one another. And you know, I had sort of audio and C++ skills before, but I had to like learn Python a lot better on that job. I had to understand like systems architecture where it involved multiple computers a lot better. So at that point, I felt like I had become a much better engineer. But then, you know, leaving RDO was a little painful because I loved the product and I had wonderful teammates. Um, but I kind of knew that you know, we were going head to head with Spotify at the time. Spotify was just giving away their product for free, and we were charging. And of course, free is a lot more exciting. So if you raise like you know, $350 million and you give away your product, you're going to have a little bit of an advantage. And so one of the things that I learned really early is it's not the best product, because we would always win best radio. We would like our users at RDO absolutely loved us.
Mhm.
But like, you know, being competitive as far as products, and we were kind of trying to diversify a little bit. We went into doing a Netflix competitor. Um, and it just, I'm like, it's not just the quality of the product you build, it's also the business model of what you're doing. And so I finally decided to uh, just do like some consulting. A friend of mine had a little startup, and there were like 7 people in it or something like this. It was like really small. And I came in, and on the very first day, I said, okay, well, in 1 week, you are going to have run out of space on your database. So if we don't stop everything that we're doing, then everything stops working in 1 week. And so we we quickly came up with a plan to go and fix it. And then the CEO basically said, hey, see what you're doing here. I would love it if you came and just ran the engineering team.
Mhm.
And really loved the people. And I wasn't planning on staying on because it was my first kind of non-music role, because we were building a device that you plug into your car. It called 911 if you got in a crash, and it would like save you money on your insurance and do IoT stuff like you know, connect right as you get home. Your house is the perfect temperature because it connected to your Nest and stuff like this. Yeah, and it was funny working on this product because it was like the great era of IoT, and like now that we're way later, I can kind of look at all of this and sort of how IoT evolved versus how it was right then. Really, the zeitgeist of tech was really around it, and so we got a lot of really good attention for building an IoT product. We scaled to like this massive number of users with billions of miles traveled, and I got to make some really fun choices. So like, you know, I got to be Databricks' first customer because we had a ton of automotive data that we had to do. And, you know, I met the Databricks team, figured out how to do this. And so we built this whole streaming platform with Spark, kind of before anybody else did. I got to speak on the Spark Summit stage. You know, it was really fun to have those early, you get to decide all the architecture. And so going from being sort of a senior contributor with like one part of the team just focused on the AI piece to being able to run the whole engineering team was this like was a huge challenge, but really fun. I think the thing that I learned more so than anything is that once you get to that level, it stops being about technical problems and a lot more about people problems. like, helping people have better conversations and helping people sort of figure out how to have agreements across everything. So, you've got your mobile team that says, oh, I really want to do it this way, and your device team wants to do it another way, and your backend team wants to do it another way, and the user experience people want you to be iterated. Like, everybody is going in a different direction, even though they all want the same thing. So, like, you're working ahead all the time.
Mhm. I was wondering, when you were, I guess, like dealing with the conflicts and everything, maybe can you give us an example of like how do you solve it? I feel like I've never asked this type of question ever. It's more towards like AI or like other stuff, but since like you brought it up about like, I think later on in your career, it's like a lot about like managing people. But I guess like when people have different expectations or like different goals, how do you kind of like make sure that they're all going to the same direction? Even today, you're the CTO of Microsoft for Startups, and I feel like I'm sure your team is huge, and then you have to manage everybody's like or core stakeholders like decision making, and then making sure that everybody's moving to the same direction. Basically, if you could give us like an example of how do you solve conflict. I know I was an interviewer. I feel like the leadership principles and stuff like that. I'm like,
actually, AWS taught me a ton about this later. So, later when running a global team at AWS, I feel like one amazing thing about Amazon is that they are coming from the retail roots. Amazon is really, really good at operations, and it sort of teaches you from different angles, like how do you measure things, how do you ask hard questions, and how do you kind of iterate quickly to get aligned. But of course, I had learned those lessons as like a CTO and a VP of engineering before kind of coming to Amazon, but it was like different angles of the same thing. Now that I've done it enough times, I think that I've learned a ton of lessons, and some of them were quite painful. One of which is like, no matter how hard you try to be an excellent communicator, like, you're going to have to say things multiple times from multiple angles, and you will be misunderstood. Right. And it can be really painful. I was like, an introverted gay kid growing up. I didn't necessarily like a classical pianist who codes. When you have that background, you don't necessarily want to have a lot of conflict, and yet you're definitely going to have conflict. It's like part of the process that happens. And so as you're going through, you understand this, you want to work ahead on the things that might be really difficult. Some of which are so easy, like, my engineering teams know that we have standards, like, okay, we're using metric. And they're like, what do you mean? Why not feet and inches? And you're like, nope. That is one of our standards. We're holding to it. And so you can have things in place which are kind of in mobile. They are agreements that everybody kind of knows beforehand. It's like, yes, it will be in metric. Yes, there's a linter. Yes, there's code review on every single piece of code, no matter what. And they're like, no, but I just want to check in this one thing. It's like one word. Nope. 100% inspection. Somebody else is going to look at something. Somebody will always have stake in the game for what you're doing. You're never just going at this alone. You always are going to have somebody who cares about this just as much as you do. And eventually we got to these things where we would do stuff like, we would use semantic versioning to be able to communicate a complex concept. So a semantic version, if you're not all that familiar, basically says, when I change the software, I'm going to give an indication of if it's a breaking change or not. And so it's going to help us have a critical conversation at that moment of a breaking change. So those things worked really well. And I loved the engineering side because engineering, it's a lot more process oriented in a way. So you can kind of be like very explicit, and you can do this process improvement all the time. Every time we release a version, every time we release software, we're going to make it just a little bit better. As you get into more complex things, like what I do at Microsoft for Startups, then it becomes a whole other beast. Like coming up with how you're going to measure and when you're going to do performance improvements, they can get like really tied to calendar and other things. And you can find out that you thought you had alignment, but then realize that there was just miscommunication that happened. We're running a global team. So literally you have people who are in totally different time zones. They come from different cultures, and you can talk right past each other, even though you have the exact same goal. And so you have to find ways to say things in more than one way and really get to that point where you have those conversations where you can say, okay, um, here's our goals, here's how we're measuring it. Tell me, like, what is that not measuring? What are like a meaningful way that we can have another proxy around it? What's another way to do this? And then try your best not to be a jerk when things go wrong. Like, I can't tell you, you in the Valley, I don't think you can ever burn a bridge because you're just going to work with that person in the next company. So, so like, you really have to make an effort to be like a human and care about other people that you're working with. And I think that at times you hear these hilarious characters who are like really super over the top and explosive. But actually you'll find that just being nice, like, you can get really far.
I love that. I wonder, maybe we could talk about the scope of work now as a CTO of Microsoft for startups.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously, you guys are one of the biggest like cloud providers, and maybe we could talk about like the day to day as the CTO of Microsoft for startups.
It's changed quite a bit. I had a kind of a similar role at AWS before I came over to Microsoft, where at AWS, we were really focused on, this was before the great Gen AI wave. And so we were trying to get all of the foundational model companies that you now know and love to come and work with AWS and build some of these first models. And I had to have a lot of like weird conversations with senior executives there to be like, hey, this Gen AI thing is going to be really big and important. And like them be like, well, there's a lot of businesses we could go into, Rob. Why would we want to go into this one? I'm like, I think this is a really big deal. And once we had brought on all the things that became Bedrock and everything else, that became a lot bigger deal. When I came over to Microsoft was already like in on AI, and so it was this huge difference in, I felt like before I was trying to prove like the utility and the value, and here Microsoft had like more than 5 different AI strategies. They were working on things on Windows laptops. They were working on security. They had, how to build AI. They had it integrated into your business applications. They had it integrated into your data. Like, it was just like, okay, we're going for this. But the big difference was, in some respects, Microsoft was a challenger brand to startups. So AWS had always long had a huge startup relationship. Microsoft has these great relationships with Fortune 500 companies. You'll never be treated better than if you were like a Microsoft customer who's just been there forever. Like, they just really go all out. And so as I came in and started becoming part of the team, the first goal was to really expand globally. We picked target demographics to go and like figure out how to start introducing Microsoft deeper into the startup ecosystem. Mm-hmm. So we had teams in London and Tel Aviv and in New York and San Francisco, and really just trying to Bangalore, and really focused on like really specific sort of areas to just do a whole bunch of events. And for me, I hadn't actually really done that many events, and now if you look behind me, like a million of these like event tags.
I want to give a shout out to someone from Microsoft for Startups sponsored our first it's like a cocktail hour. So shout out to Microsoft for Startups. I would love, I currently still hold Microsoft for Startup merch. So
nice.
I wonder, so when you're thinking about like, coming from AWS is like very, I would say like in the startup land, like I think it's very having a really, really strong mind share, right? So when you are at Microsoft, as you mentioned, like, the first thing to do is kind of like expanding the mind share to the startup community. So I guess like maybe we could talk about like first of all like the differentiation between like Microsoft versus like all these other competitive landscape of like different companies versus, and then maybe we could talk about like you mentioned about like the events, it's like a big part, and then what are some stuff that like you felt like was working on a very like enterprise level, because I think like it's very hard to track the result, right? So like it's like sign up our webinar, but like a lot of people just grab a tote bag and left. So and then I'm just out of curiosity, I'm like, how do you kind of like track these kind of outcome for your own like KPI and everything?
Well, you want to always start off with like a theory of what you think you're going to expect. And
Mhm.
so my perspective was the first 3 years of a startup program might be kind of net negative, net neutral. You're going to give away a lot of free stuff. You're going to be trying to engage here. But then as you work with those companies and they go from being kind of, you know, uh, two gals in a garage to like somebody who's actually got a really meaningful business, then all of a sudden they become these huge partners. Of course, you have just absolute this incredible growth that happens as these companies mature. And of course, I'm like a startup true believer because of course I did multiple startups and I was able to take them all the way to exit. And so I'm in for that period of time, and so was Microsoft. So just started off as this incredible like partner of like, hey, we had the long-term vision, we really want to grow this over a long period of time. And then by year 5, all the startups who have come through the program are now deep partners, and they're building across everything. And so like the money that you gave away is like basically the winners are essentially just paid for the whole program, because as you have these absolute monster companies going through, and all ships kind of rise with the tide.
Mhm.
And so we expected to have this period of time where we were kind of working on deficit, and then we are going to come to this point where it's really good. And that totally came true. Like every dollar you put into startups, I think it just comes right back. You just have to have the vision, which I'm so fortunate to have colleagues in leadership who like really understood AI and really understood that like startups were a worthy investment. And
Mhm.
so we knew that we were going to have to go in and do it from multiple standpoints, because startup developers often tend to be really good,
Mhm.
but they want to move really fast. And when you come onto Azure is often like very overbuilt and powerful for like what a lot of people are trying to do. It is ready to build the biggest models in the world. It is ready to host the biggest companies. It is ready to like, and so look, my perspective was that they came on like a little intimidated. They're like, oh, this is like for grown-ups, and like I'm just trying to build a prototype right now. And so like figuring out how to work from that, like you can still do things the right way. You can still actually get to the point where you're building for like massive scale and for enterprise agreements and everything else. And so the biggest difference was that like Microsoft had this direct path for startups to build with enterprise. And we've actually really helped startups go from like essentially nothing to, you know, uh, 9-figure contracts, like absolutely insane things working with enterprises, which I was able to do a lot more easily at Microsoft with this incredible team than at AWS, where there's just a lot larger. There was a really large surface area, I would say. And so it was harder for me to navigate going in terms of that massive surface area. And so both places incredible. Like all the hyperscalers are awesome for something. And it really kind of comes down to knowing yourself and how you want to build your business. What I loved about our take at Microsoft was that we were going to be really good partners. And so I felt like what we were able to do in terms of, and you asked about events, so I'll explain really quick, which is we wanted to just be in the community and listen.
Mhm.
Like, we actually wanted to go in and understand what our startups actually missing, and we got different answers than I really expected. Um, you know, everybody's startup journey can be coming from a different place. You have people who were experts in their field, like PhDs in biology going into making something new. You have people who are, 21-year-olds who are just like, they want to change the world. They're just going for it in the beginning. You have people who are just incredibly business oriented. They're just saying, hey, I see a business opportunity and I'm going to go for it. And so talking to those folks, they all had different needs. And, some of them were like, hey, could you help me meet a co-founder? Others were, hey, I just need some AI architectures. I'm really technical. Give me what I need. Get out of my way. Or, and so figuring out both how to help them from where they are, but then also see a little bit further past, which is like, okay, this is where you are right now. How do I help you, stay on track for the next year or 2 years? Because how do you get through the desert? Because every startup founder, they're going to have that period of time where it's like they have no hope. They're really going for it, but like they are getting no feedback. They're just kind of walking through this, and like, can we be part of that process and help them more? So we really had to build a team that had people who are business experts. We had to have people who could come in and debug live issues. We had to have people who were expert enough to go and try to like say, hey, I want to partner with Microsoft Research, or I want to be able to go and work directly with M365 team. And so I feel like I work with a team of Sherpas that can kind of figure out how to connect you to the right people no matter what's happening and get you to the business results that you want.
I wonder when it comes to, I guess, like as you mentioned, like when you were doing the research for different startups to seeing what they need, uh, sorry, you had like different answers. Like, what are some stuff that you feel like were surprising to you?
In the AI age, it's been pretty exciting. And there's kind of the economics of AI that people don't talk about. So you have these startups who just do incredibly well at the beginning. And you're just like, man, it looks like it's winner take most. They're going to just take over and they're doing really well. And then all of a sudden somebody else comes and kind of tops them. But I don't think people think about sort of what the trade-offs are that they're making early on. And so, imagine you're just like messing around with GPT, you're spending like a few $1,000s a month, and you think, hey, I've really solved something awesome here. So you decide to go and scale to users. But now you've got like multiple regions. You're trying to figure out what happens if there's too much latency between you and the user. You've got to build in redundancy. Now you may have more than one model in play, and your costs basically explode. And then you start getting some real traction, and now of course you have to think about like supervised fine tuning. You have to think about all your competition. You have all these other people who are going through, and now you have this massive cost, and you're doing all this infrastructure, but maybe for things that aren't core to your business anymore. And so what I think is really surprising is I see a lot of people who they're trying to like throw in the kitchen sink at the beginning of their startup. They're trying to have their AI do everything. And as a result, they're maintaining everything as these things are going through. And now you could have these, and like you could be spending $100,000 a month on AI models and not really know what you're getting for it. And also like your competition can then come in. They're going to build less than you, but it's going to be really precise. They're going to put in some really good UI. They're going to like get you to where you need to get the right context faster, and they're going to come in and eat your lunch. And so it's much more competitive. I've seen startups come and go faster than before. I've also seen, I literally talked to a startup last week, two people, just two people. And, they're at 5 million ARR. And they're just like, we're good. We'll stay at two people.
I mean, what does a two people startup do?
Because I'll be a little careful to say too much, but what they do is they do a bunch of fine tunes. And so they take models and then they make them work for really specific use cases, and people love that. And so they're not really model builders, they're model fine tuners, and they're absolutely destroying. And so if they want me to tell about later, I'll post on it on LinkedIn.
About that, I wonder. So, like, since you have mentioned that you have seen a lot of like the startups are like, I guess, like spending time in the right thing or wrong thing. And what are some, like, I guess like one of the things is like when Microsoft for startups is picking startups to partner with, how do you guys know like which startup have the longevity to become an enterprise in the future? And what is the selection criteria? Because I think I've interacted with some other members from the VC team, and I feel like I've learned a certain philosophy on like, you know, how you guys kind of like interact with VCs. But what about like the picking the best startup from these like investors, or like I guess beyond the investor, is there any other ways to kind of funnel the best startup into the Microsoft ecosystem?
So we've tried to be really generous, and honestly, it's just because I have excellent leadership who just like can see the long term and was like willing to go for it. And so when we started off, we really tried to just give away Azure credits and 365 license and LinkedIn and all this stuff to basically anybody with an idea. And we were cooking on that for a while, and honestly, it was super great. But we learned some lessons from that experience. Unfortunately, there are some bad actors out there. There are people who will like mine Bitcoin if you give them compute or like stuff like this. So we quickly figured out that you want somebody who has some stake in the game in order to support you. So I think we would love to help every bootstrap startup be a huge success. But what we found is that uh, it helps to have great partners with great VCs, because those VCs, they've had to go through quite a lot of effort. And what they're basically saying is like, I care that this is successful. And so what we did is we just kind of built a ramp where it's like, okay, we're going to give away uh, stuff to early founders. We're going to help them be successful as early as possible. And then as they get more stake in the game, we're going to give them more. And so rather than use it or lose it, it's like, basically use some and then use some more. Because we really do think that uh, we're really positive. We really think that if people are given a chance, that they're going to be able to go off and build the next great companies. So we don't inherently think that just because you are from a top VC that you are going to be the best startup. But what we can do is we can sort of say, hey, if you're using this stuff and you're getting a lot of value out of this stuff, then we can keep contributing. We can keep doing more stuff. And so I've got this excellent team that doesn't just like give away stuff. They actually like check in, and they try to figure out ways to provide new opportunities. So like, at Ignite just a little bit ago, one of our startups was a launch partner for uh, Foundry Local, right? When we did Model as a Service, we had several launch partners for the Model as a Service that came from the program, because we just keep kind of putting in. And so if you match the effort, then you tend to get some good results. Unfortunately, I'm sure we have we're working with hundreds of thousands of startups here. I'm sure that we like miss some signal, and so we're always trying to get better at this. We're always trying to iterate. We're always trying to figure out ways to engage better. And so we continue to iterate on the process. I do think the VC partners have been a huge uh, plus, because not only do they help us sort of know that somebody has some stake in the game, but also we learn a lot of things from their portfolio development companies. We try to bring that to the stuff that we do. We try different kinds of events. Like we just worked with Inception Labs to do like a big hackathon for people who are already in big tech who wanted to start startups. So we're trying to kind of work through other elements of the ecosystem and make sure that we find ways to support at all the different levels as best as we can.
For sure. I wonder in terms of like the stage of the company, since I think startup have like various different stages, right? Like the two people in a garage, or two, you know, raising C, Series A, Series B. I guess like at what entry point do you personally feel like it's like a really good entry point for Microsoft to enter? Is that like the inception stage, or would it be like a little bit later on?
Well, I'm more opinionated on this than a lot of people. um, I want us to be right there helping people build code. And so, as I said, great leadership. We can give, if you're a Microsoft for Startups customer, even if you're just very beginning, you get like $1,000 right away. And you can use that on GitHub Copilot, right? And then we have VS Code. Like we're trying to help you even before you've done anything. Like you're like, get on GitHub, be able to start doing some coding, some experimentation. I've had people who've like quickly started a startup, realized that was the wrong one, pull that one down, start another one, same kind of process, be able to do this. So I think the earlier the better. And that like we really do try to incubate people, give them like a long window where they're not getting pressured to like do specific things. Like this time to grow and like try to make sure that there's plenty of learning materials. We have like a whole advocacy group. We build all these samples. We really do try to make it easier, and we try to be out in the community. So I do think earlier is way better. Of course, how do we get lots of startups? We get lots of startups who are like in the tank, thinking super hard, and then they show up with like a completely built product, and they say, "I'm ready to sell to the enterprise." Well, we're awesome at helping those startups. So like I think those kind of get us a lot of accolades, or like ones that want to be like in the foundry, we get a lot of accolades for those. But yeah, we're incredible at helping startups with enterprise. Like that, we got that down. But the earlier we can get in and the more we can flex that muscle, and we of course we're learning on the way, but that's like where I see the biggest growth potential.
For sure. Since you have engaged with many startups as well as you have like startup experience yourself, as well as like in the big tech company, what are some AI trends that you feel like will be dominating in 2026? I feel like this year is agent, but next year, is there any predictions on like which buzzword will be trending?
Yeah, there's a difference between agent and agents, which is I think a big one. That like we have like the marketplace, so marketplace.microsoft.com now, and you can go and check that out. And I'll tell you, like it's going to be really different when you have an agent interfacing with another agent. Like that's going to be bonkers, frankly. And so the systems that you need to do that, like all the different layers of things, like having access to the right place and what are the right patterns, we have a lot of that stuff on the Foundry. And so obviously, I think that's a big deal. But from my perch, I see supervised fine tuning as being incredibly important. Um, One of the biggest differences that I see is that if you go to uh, build for your specific use case, like you're going to want to have the right context, the right data right there. And so in the past, I think a lot of startups were just throwing their they're just kind of throwing all their data into, I don't know, like Cloudflare, and then taking a bunch of GPUs across a bunch of different places and then trying to figure out how to make it work. Um, but what I think you'll find now is that startups are trying to get it closer to the data that they need to do the fine tuning that they want to do. And so, like, there's this big kind of movement to, like, okay, here's where my customer's data is. I need to do everything right. And so I think that you're going to see a lot more of these supervised fine tunes. And I think that those things, I think people underestimate there's a lot of space for these transformer and architectures to actually like, there's a lot more that they can do. We haven't really hit the end, but it's in the AI age, data is programming. And so you want to be next to the data. You want to be able to get that business data out of M365. You want to be able to go and to tie in the right hooks to your other business data. I don't know, maybe it's living in LinkedIn. Whatever it is that you're doing, you want to be as close to it as possible and get the right context. So I think that you're going to see a lot more supervised fine tuning, and I think you're going to see a whole area of reinforcement learning where you get into more virtual worlds. You're going to see a lot more sandboxed environments where people are really focused on getting the right context in the right place at the right time.
I love the word context. So I feel like context and memory, I feel like it's going to be huge in the next year. So like instead of people storage every piece of data, but like storage like the data that's actually meaningful to the business, right? So I guess like what are some startups that you thought were very interesting in those spaces? And then the other part you mentioned was like agent versus agent. So there's agent orchestration layer of things. So like basically essentially how agent interact with each other. So I
Mhm.
wonder when you are looking at these spaces, like what would you say are like startups should be building that actually would be advantageous to like I guess have the longevity to go farther down the line instead of like incumbent or like just like a big tech company started working on similar things.
Yeah, Microsoft is always going to have coverage for just about everything, but isn't always going to go deep. And so one of the big questions that I get from startups is like, what's Microsoft going to do? And I'm like, well, we have Azure Monitor, for example, and like you can go through and, it's very useful. You can keep track of your billing, you can see your bugs and all this other stuff. But then we also sell Datadog like right there on Azure natively. And it's like, well, of course, we're not going to go and try to be as focused on that business. Like there's too much other things. And when your mission is to empower everybody to do more, like there's like a certain kind of layer you have to have across everything. And then there's this huge opportunity that comes forth and like knowing your domain better than anybody else. And so the people who really understand their problem and like start understanding how to work in the right places has a huge deal. So we're seeing that AI works best if it works where you're working because it wants that context. So like you're in Excel, AI right in Excel. But like, with the marketplace, you're going to be able to sell like agents right in Excel, right? You want things to be as close to where you are. Like if I'm switching windows to GPT and then coming back, then I'm context switching, right? And then we also know that user interface really matters for both the people and the agents. So don't make me type summarize this. Like give me a button that says summarize and then you make the difference on the other side. We get to work with a bunch of really interesting startups. There's one called Not Diamond that all they focused on was they focused on a number of things, but they figured out it's like, okay, here's how I'm going to make the model routing work by changing it from like summarize this on one side to like give me context on this on another. Like they go through and do that mapping for you. You're going to have to do some of that work and make it transparent to your users. I think a lot of times people don't realize just how much like wizardry is right under their fingertips, but they don't know. When you use Chat GPT and you copy something, they're using that context to give you like a better result. When you're typing on your iPhone and you think that, oh, I've got this perfect, well, it's lying to you a little bit, right? Like you're not hitting the exact pixel where that key is. It kind of understands where you are relative to it and then maps it for you. So, like building the interfaces that map the complexity away where you need it is this incredibly powerful thing. And so, we're just going to see these startups who figure out the exact right interface for those specific problems, whether it's contract review and just actually understanding here are the gnarly bits of this contract. I'm not going to show you everything. I'm going to show you exactly the parts that you care about. And by the way, I'm going to help you make decisions on which one. Those kind of details, I think, really make a difference.
I wonder, so like since I guess like um one of the questions is like when there is like different type of like developer tools since you're the CTO. So like yesterday, not yesterday, but like 2 days ago, I was like chatting with a partner from AEA and then I was asking like what is the keyword for 2026? And then she said it may be like autonomous. So I feel like basically, like this year, I think a lot of people are very impressed by Cursor or all these like kind of no-code tools or like local tools to people are building stuff through Lovable to like design different website. And I wonder from like the developer standpoint, like what are something that you feel like is like a developer stack that you personally can't live without? And then what does it kind of like look like for you going forward?
Well, there's what I can't live without, and then there's also just what I'm having so much fun with. I had at Ignite, I think you can actually, I think it's on YouTube now. I did a demo where I used the Microsoft Agent Framework, which is built on, it's totally open source, but it's built on semantic kernel and autogen. I used just vanilla Python, and I took MCP to take a folder of screenshots to smartly organize them, mostly locally on your machine using local OCR. And then if it didn't understand it, it would go grab a model off Foundry and then use that to understand it. But then like the twist was, instead of building it with code, I built the spec. So instead of me going through and describing to GitHub Copilot or Cursor or whatever you're going to use, just going through and like saying, here are my user stories, here's what it should do, here's how you should test it, just in English. And then you can go and you can take that spec, and it won't build you the exact same code as it built me, but it will build code that works for what you're doing. And you could use different models to do that. You can use different routes. I find different models give me different results. Like, I think that the models that were trained with more visual information build better user interfaces than the ones that are trained with mostly text. And so I use several different models every time I'm coding anything now. And I use them in conjunction with kind of other stuff that's going on. The future is multi-model forever, as far as I'm concerned. And figuring out which tools can work with that set is really key. So, of course, I'm using VS Code with GitHub Copilot because I work at Microsoft, but I actually also really like it. I've used Cursor and I've used Windsurf because my startups, they use all of this stuff. So when I'm working with them, I need to understand what the trade-offs are. I think probably, I'll tell you one kind of funny thing. At Microsoft, I'm always asking for like extra permissions to use more tools than other people, because I want to go test, Wave Dev. I want to go test all of these different pieces of software, and understand like how they work, and so what other people are experiencing. Because I don't really care if you are a Windsurf, Google user, or anything else. I want to be able to meet you where you are and then help you translate that world. Um, so, I have my favorite dev tools, but then I also have my favorite non-dev stuff. Like, if you're not using voice all the time, I think you're crazy. It's so helpful to be able to like record myself on a walk, and I'll like talk about everything that I want the program to do. And I'll just like go outside, go on a walk, and I probably look a little crazy talking to myself, but it works great. And then I have a model take that and turn it into something smaller. And then I take that and I go and I'm like, try to build towards a really good description of what it is I want. These problems are now layers. And so I would say I'm not a vibe coder. I'm a context engineer. I'm trying to come up with the perfect context of what my program is. I'm going to use everything at my disposal. I'm going to use Whisperflow on my computer. I'm going to record myself while I'm jogging, like anything that can help me get that context. What is the most popular agent in the world? Well, it's deep research. I use deep research all the time because I'm trying to come up with what are those pieces of context that I'm missing that I could add into what I'm doing. And so I like being able to do it iteratively and layers, and not try to just mess everything all as one go, because then it's like throwing a dart. I want to know that there's some other ways I can interact with it. That's where I feel like we've been really trying to build towards with things like GitHub Spec Kit, which I think is really fun. If you haven't seen those videos with Dan, go check them out on YouTube. They're really fun. Um, and so I use a lot of those tools, and then I always try other fun things. I will admit I'm having a really great time with Nano Banana right now. I built recipe cards for my family for Christmas. So it's like all like pictures with like old timey, like here's Rob's banana pudding, and it has beautiful like kind of illustrations in it. And that kind of stuff is really fun. So I'll keep always trying everything that's out there. And it's never enough to just know it from one angle. You got to try a bunch.
I love that. Sorry, I'm like a little bit slow because I don't want to cough on screen. I wonder, so since like I feel like you had so many experience in like looking at all these kind of different startups, how do you think startups should build defensibility these days? Because for startup, I think the biggest challenge is distribution, not necessarily. I mean, technology is like obviously you can build a moat off that, but I think what bigger company has is like the existing distribution, right? So for the startup that you have interact with, what would you say can help them have a really strong defensibility? And how would you suggest startup to build distribution besides making YC launch videos?
Yeah,
By the way, no
it,
shade.
it, it's
Yeah.
a really funny thing. I think people think that they only have one go at it, which is an impossible thing. Like, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. Like I have one VC friend who said, "I just tell all my startups to go viral," and I'm like, "That's like that's a lot." And as a person, when you're like in the desert and you're building, you can't. Uh, that's not a great goal to have, like go viral. You kind of need to know that you're building towards something where you have those agreements and everything else, and you're going. And I know distribution is key, but customers who love your product is always the way as far as I'm concerned. Like getting towards something that's really good, and understand that customers usually don't tell you like what they need. They tell you what they know they can get. So like you can't just ask your customers to build your business for you. You actually have to really listen and really get engaged. And then when you start having stuff, you need to know when to throw gas on the fire. And so there are times where you can go for those viral marketing moments. There are times where you can actually use VC money really like boldly. And so I'm always trying to convince my startups to be a little bit more bold. Um, no, we see so many different things, but when I'm working with one, I'll always say like, what if we were just a little more aggressive here? Like, are you gonna try to take like is your only goal to have the longest burn you possibly can? We don't want to miss the moment completely. You want to actually you want to know that you went for it and not have any regrets. And so if you think you know your customer super well, you know that ICP, and you think that your product is really good, then like hire that salesperson. Make sure that they can explain it better than you can. Like you want to know the we have this amazing program. It's called Pegasus, and what we do with Pegasus is we take startups that have product market fit, and then we go and we help them sell with like 200, like 20,000 plus Microsoft sellers, like to all these enterprises, and people have these awesome results. Um, but the number one reason why people don't get into Pegasus at the beginning is when I ask them, how do you onboard your customers? They say, oh, well, the CEO gets on the phone and he talks to this person. I'm like, okay, now you're going to have people contacting you all day. Is the CEO going to answer every phone call? And so understanding kind of when to start ratcheting it up. Um, there is a really human side to the other side of it, which is I've had to do layoffs for my startups. I love it. Like when you see the milestones in somebody's like resume, you kind of miss the anti milestones. And like, you know, uh, getting fired is certainly worse than firing somebody, but not much. Like it's really awful. And so like I understand wanting to be cautious, I understand wanting to be careful about your business. Have great advisors, really kind of understand your business, take a few risks, but have them be calculated, and then really try to go for it where you can. And so yeah, I think I mean sometimes you have the other extreme. You have startups who just like completely burn through all their money in just a minute, but um, you need to be willing to take a risk.
I love that. I feel like that's such a good advice because I think like you mentioned, like I feel like everybody's really cautious about the burn because you never know where like when it's gonna go, but like, you know, sometimes you just need to like more gas in the tank to like, you know, go after the stuff that's like actually working for you. I want to be mindful of time. Maybe we wrap with a quick 1 minute fire round.
A 1 minute what? Sorry, say again.
1 minute fire round. So
okay, sure. 1 minute fire round. Go for it. Yeah.
What's your favorite book?
Right. The last book that I read was Why We Gather by Priya Parker. I really liked it.
Who would you invite to your dinner party?
I would invite Martha Argerich.
Who made the biggest impact in your career?
I would say my father.
Where can we find you outside of work?
You can find me hosting a bunch of people playing piano while everybody sings.
Wow, I love that. Wow, that's like a singing party. Well, Rob, thank you so much for coming on the show today. You did so well, especially the fire round. I was like, wow, that was literally under a minute.
I tried.
And now I'm Google the book and stuff. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Grace, it was such a pleasure. If anybody wants to reach out, always can find me on LinkedIn, and please check out startups.microsoft.com.
Amazing. Let me